The rain fell over Chicago in cold, relentless sheets, slicing through the night like silver threads. Claire Bennett pulled her coat tighter around her slim frame, bracing against the chill as she stepped out of the towering headquarters of Blackwell Publishing. Inside, the company's year-end gala was still in full swing, laughter echoing through glass walls, champagne sparkling under golden lights. But Claire just wanted to disappear. She had only been working at the publishing house for less than 2 months, a junior editor role she had fought hard to land. It was supposed to be a new beginning, a chance to prove herself. But no matter where she stood in the room, she felt invisible. The other women dazzled in gowns and red lipstick, moving through conversations with ease. Claire wore a plain black dress, safe and silent, her hair tied back in a modest bun. She looked like she didn't belong, and she felt it deeply. Claire hated attention, hated mirrors and reflections. But tonight, after a few too many glasses of wine and a careless dare from a coworker, she had slipped away from the noise. She didn't want to be the quiet girl anymore. She wanted one wild night, just one. One night to forget the years of being overlooked, of being teased and told she was nothing. One night to feel alive instead of merely surviving. And so, slightly drunk and chilled by the winter rain, Claire found herself heading toward the basement. The archive room, where old manuscripts lived in dusty peace, forgotten by most. She didn't know then that this small act of defiance, this quiet escape, was about to change everything. After that morning, Claire tried to distance herself from what had happened. She buried herself in work, arriving early, staying late, keeping her head down and eyes away, especially from the upper floors where Julian Blackwell sat like a myth wrapped in quiet authority. But distance didn't change the truth. Something had shifted. Claire began to notice his eyes in meetings. Never cold, never commanding, but attentive, as if he were listening for something she wasn't saying. Sometimes his assistant would stop by her desk with a small message or note. Simple, professional, yet somehow laced with presence. Like he was still watching, quietly. And Julian, he felt it too. He told himself it was nothing, a responsible gesture, mentorship maybe, making sure a new employee found her footing. But each time he passed by her office and saw her bent over a manuscript or laughing gently with a colleague, something stirred. A pull he didn't understand, or maybe just refused to name. One evening, Claire was the last person left on their floor. The office lights had dimmed, leaving only a soft glow from her desk spilling into the hallway. She was going over a presentation for the next morning's pitch, brows furrowed, lost in the task, unaware of footsteps approaching. "Still here?" The voice was quiet, familiar. Startled, Claire looked up. Julian leaned casually against the doorway, hands in his pockets, sleeves of his white shirt rolled up, a far cry from the polished CEO she was used to seeing. She nodded, pulse racing. "Big pitch tomorrow." Julian stepped inside, glancing at her screen. "Need a second pair of eyes?" Claire hesitated, then slowly turned the laptop toward him. They sat side by side. At first, conversation was cautious, strictly business. But slowly, it began to flow. To surprise her, Claire found herself laughing quietly, even teasing one of his ideas. And what startled her most? Julian laughed back. A real, soft laugh that lit up his face, smoothing every sharp line. By the time they finished, it was nearly midnight. Claire stretched and smiled. "Thank you," she murmured. "You didn't have to stay." Julian watched her, something unreadable in his gaze. "I wanted to." She gathered her things. Julian reached for his coat. "Let me walk you down." She almost declined, but didn't. They stepped into the elevator together. In the silence, Claire could hear the soft hum of the city through the glass. When they stepped outside, the wind hit her hard. She shivered. Without a word, Julian slipped off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, just like that night in the basement. Claire looked up at him, and for one suspended second, the whole world held its breath. Claire told no one about that night. The quiet evening spent shoulder to shoulder with Julian, reviewing slides, exchanging thoughts. not as boss and subordinate, but as two people quietly learning each other. Still, something inside her had shifted. Since then, everything had felt slightly different. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a melody playing beneath the noise. She still moved quietly through the office, but her steps seemed lighter. She no longer tried so hard to vanish. And Julien, he noticed. He found himself lingering outside her door more often, sometimes with a reason, a manuscript, a meeting, sometimes with none, just watching her for a few silent seconds before walking away. Her image clung to him, soft hair, focused eyes, slender hands wrapped around a coffee mug. One winter evening, after the launch party for a new book, the company held a celebration at a historic hotel in downtown Chicago. Claire had nearly skipped it, but in the end, she came. In a simple navy dress, hair loose, her presence soft but undeniable. She hovered near the edge of the room, where the lights dimmed and the laughter blurred. Then, a voice she knew by heart now. "You came." She turned, Julien, wearing a black suit, no tie, the top button undone, his gray eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "Almost didn't," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I'm glad you did," he said, and his gaze held hers. Not intense, not forceful, just open. They left the crowd, stepping out onto the stone balcony behind the ballroom. The city glittered below them. Claire leaned slightly on the railing, cold marble pressing against her arms. "Do you ever feel like," she began, then paused, "like you're always standing on the edge of something, like just one moment of courage would change everything?" Julien was quiet. "I used to, until the only person who gave me courage disappeared." Claire turned to him. Light caught on his features, the hard lines softened by something unspoken. She saw loneliness in him, the kind she understood too well. Julien reached up, slowly, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers grazed her skin, soft, gentle. She froze. The space between them tightened, just a few inches now. His gaze flicked down, not demanding, not rushed, just waiting. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the warmth of him, the stillness between them pulsing like electricity. And for a heartbeat, she leaned forward, just slightly, heart rising. But fear clawed up from her chest. A memory, a voice, 1,000 old doubts. She stepped back, as if burned. I should go," she whispered, voice tight with fear. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the cold air and the moment unclaimed. That night, Claire lay in bed, eyes wide open. Sleep never came. Her heart raced, too full, too confused. She wanted him. She wanted the safety in his gaze, the warmth in his presence. But the scared part of her, the one that feared being hurt, still held the reins. That night, she stared at her ceiling for hours, replaying the moment again and again. Her heart had said yes, but her fear had whispered no. She hoped that pulling away would make it all fade quietly. But the world had already taken notice. Claire walked into the office as usual, coffee in hand, exhaustion from a sleepless night still clinging to her. But the moment she turned on her computer, the screen exploded with notifications. Emails, messages, headlines. And then she saw it. Her face plastered on the homepages of multiple media sites. Blackwell Publishing's junior editor, sleeping her way to the top. Photos of her in the navy dress at the launch party. Shots of her and Julien exiting the building late at night. A grainy elevator image of them standing close, too close. The story was venomous. Claire Bennett, the inexperienced editor, had allegedly earned her position through intimacy with Julien Blackwell. Her chest went hollow. Her fingers shook as she scrolled through the comments. Obvious gold digger. Didn't think Blackwell would fall for someone so plain. Trading sex for status, how original. She sat frozen at her desk, barely breathing. Each word felt like it was tearing her apart from the inside. She had been bullied before, mocked, ignored. but never like this. Julian arrived less than an hour later. He stormed into the room, coat still wet from rain, his jaw clenched tight. His assistant trailed behind him, but he motioned for silence. "Claire," his voice was low but sharp, "I saw the articles." She couldn't look at him, couldn't lift her head. "I've already called the legal team. I'm demanding full retractions, public apologies. They will not get away with this." But Claire remained motionless, her eyes blurred with tears. "Claire," Julian said more softly, taking a step forward, "you don't have to face this alone." And something inside her snapped. "Don't I?" she whispered, her voice brittle. "You can close your office door and make it all disappear. I'm the one being paraded around the internet like a joke." Julian stopped, his face pained. "Do you think your lawyers can erase how I feel right now?" she said, choking on her words. "I have spent my whole life trying to disappear, trying not to be noticed. And now," her voice cracked, "now I'm the punchline. They might turn my silence into a weapon, and I don't know how to defend myself." That night, Claire quietly packed her things. She didn't wait for anyone to stop her. No one did. Julian called, texted, silence. By midnight, he was standing outside her apartment, rain soaking through his clothes, hands clenched at his sides. He waited. Eventually, Claire appeared, wrapped in a thin coat, her face pale. "Julian," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" He stepped closer, eyes glassy but calm. "Please, don't shut me out. I can't let it end like this." "You don't understand," her voice trembled. "I'm not strong like you. I don't know how to survive this without falling apart." Julian reached out, brushing the rain from her cheek with trembling fingers. "Claire, you're stronger than you know. You've always been strong, even when you believed you didn't deserve to be heard." She broke then. Her body leaned into his, sobs racking her chest. Julian wrapped his arms around her, holding her like she was the only thing keeping him from falling apart too. Days passed. The sky outside had cleared, but inside Claire the storm still raged. She shut herself off, phone on silent, no social media. Julian had said the words, stood in the rain, held her like she was his lifeline, but inside her, fear still ruled. One late evening, Claire stayed behind at her new job, a small independent publishing house where she'd taken a temporary role. She walked alone down a quiet city street, the cold wind wrapping around her like ice. Her old coat barely held the warmth. Then, footsteps behind her. She slowed, looked back. A man in a dark hoodie, his face hidden, walking faster. Claire quickened her pace, her heart raced. The steps behind her sped up. She broke into a run, heels clattering against the sidewalk, panic rising in her throat. Then his hand grabbed her arm. She screamed, struggled violently. Her bag fell. "Let go of me," she shouted. Just then, a car screeched to a halt beside them, a black SUV. Doors flew open. Two men rushed out, one of them, Julian. "Get away from her," Julian shouted, barreling into the man, shoving him back. The second man, Julian's head of security, pinned the attacker to the ground. Claire collapsed onto the curb, gasping, shaking. Julian ran to her, dropping to his knees. "Claire, are you hurt? Are you okay?" His voice cracked, frantic. She clung to him, sobbing, her whole body trembling. "I was so scared, I couldn't breathe." Julian pressed his forehead to hers, his breath shallow and shaking. "I'm here, Claire. I've got you. No one is ever going to hurt you like that again. Not while I'm breathing." His voice cracked on the last word. Later, wrapped in a blanket in the back of the SUV, Claire sat curled up, eyes red. Julian sat beside her, never letting go of her hand. "How did you find me?" she asked softly. Julian gave a quiet, weary smile. "I never stopped watching over you, Claire. Even when you pushed me away, even when you said you needed time, I was still there." Claire turned away, tears welling. "Why?" she asked. "Why me?" Julian hesitated. Because I know what it feels like to lose everything, to live in silence. But you make me want to step out of it. You make me want to try. Claire reached out, her fingers brushing his. I've been afraid for so long, she whispered. But when I'm with you, I feel braver. Julian gently pulled her into his arms, holding her like something precious. His voice was soft, trembling against her hair. We can be brave together. You don't have to do this alone. From that moment on, everything began to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a soft wind signaling the change of seasons. In the days that followed, Claire moved through life like someone still waking up from a long, painful dream. But slowly, in the warmth of Julian's quiet presence, something began to soften, where most people had never heard the rumors. But something inside her had changed. She no longer ran from her feelings, no longer avoided the things that scared her. Julian called her every morning, a simple good morning text, sometimes just a smiley face. He didn't rush her, didn't demand anything. He was simply there, consistently, patiently. On quiet weekends, he'd show up with coffee and a stack of old novels, and sometimes they'd sit side by side for hours, saying nothing and needing nothing more. Claire began to write again, not for publication, not to impress anyone, but to breathe, to hear the voice inside her that she had buried so deeply for so long. Julian was the first to read her words. He didn't say much, just nodded, then said softly, This is you, the truest version. And for the first time in her life, Claire believed that. One early spring evening, they sat together in Julian's apartment by the fireplace, watching flames dance across the ceiling. Claire rested her head on his shoulder, their fingers intertwined. Do you remember when I told you I never felt like I belonged anywhere? She asked quietly. Julian nodded gently. I'm not sure that's true anymore, she whispered, smiling slightly. I think I'm starting to find a place. Julian turned to her, his gaze steady and warm. He didn't say, I love you, not yet. He didn't have to. His eyes, his hand closing gently around hers, those said enough. In that quiet moment, Claire felt something she'd never dared to believe before. That maybe, just maybe, she did deserve joy. She had once walked through this city like a ghost. Now she stood in the light, whole, wounded, real. And for the first time, she didn't want to disappear. Summer came early that year in Chicago, not with scorching heat, but with a gentle warmth that felt like a promise after the storm. Inside a glass-walled hall on the top floor of Blackwell Publishing, hundreds of guests sat quietly, eyes fixed on the stage where Claire Bennett stood. She was no longer the timid girl hiding behind a computer screen. Today, Claire wore an elegant white dress, her hair pinned up, her gaze steady and clear. Beside her stood Julian Blackwell in a sharp charcoal suit, his eyes never straying from her. They weren't just CEO and employee anymore. Today, they were co-founders of the Second Light Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting those who had experienced trauma or abuse of power, especially in workplace environments. Claire stepped up to the microphone. She paused, not out of fear, but to breathe in the moment. Then she spoke. There was a time I believed my presence didn't matter, that the safest thing I could do was stay quiet, invisible, unseen, but I was wrong. Heads nodded across the room. A few people wiped at their eyes. My story doesn't begin with triumph. It begins with fear, with silence, with wishing I could be someone else. But someone once told me, you deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. And for the first time, I believed them. She turned toward Julian, once the untouchable man on magazine covers, now the one who held her pain with care, who saw the pieces of her that even she had once buried. Claire ended her speech with one simple line. We don't need to be perfect to be worthy of love, of opportunity, or of a new beginning. We just need to be brave enough not to disappear. The room rose in a standing ovation. Julian stepped forward, wrapping one arm gently around her waist. He didn't need a microphone. His voice, calm and rich, carried clearly through the room. Claire Bennett has taught me more than any business textbook ever could. She is light, she is resilience, she is the reason I believe that one person can save another, not through power, but through belief. He turned toward her, pressed a kiss to her forehead. And in that moment, under the stage lights, surrounded by applause and shared emotion, Claire understood something she had never dared to believe. She belonged. Not because she stood beside a powerful man, not because people were watching, but because for the first time in her life she was no longer afraid of being seen. That night, they returned to Julian's apartment. No stage lights, no crowd, just two people, tired but whole. Out on the high-rise balcony, Claire rested her head against Julian's shoulder. The breeze played gently with her hair. Below them, the city sparkled like a living constellation. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Julian gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire nodded. "More than okay." She turned to look at him, her eyes steady. "You know, if someone had told me I'd stand on that stage and share my story, I would have laughed. I never thought I was brave enough. But you believed in me. Before I ever believed in myself." Julian leaned in, his forehead brushing against hers. "No, you always had it in you. I just reminded you." Claire smiled, a real smile, unhidden. "You saved me," she whispered. Julian shook his head softly. "No, Claire, you saved me." In that moment, wrapped in night wind and the quiet rhythm of two hearts finding peace, they both knew there would still be hard days ahead. But now, they wouldn't have to face them alone. And that made all the difference. No one ever said happiness was an ending. In truth, happiness is a pause, a soft place between the longer roads we all keep walking. That night, as Claire and Julian sat together on the balcony, the breeze curling around their shoulders, the city glittering beneath their feet, they both knew their story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Claire had learned how to stand up for herself. She was no longer the girl who hid behind lowered eyes, no longer living just to stay unnoticed. She wrote more often now, not to escape fear, but to capture what she believed in. Her words carried weight, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. Julian was still the man in the boardroom, still closing major deals, but something in him had softened, a quiet shift. He listened more, and sometimes, in the middle of a long strategic meeting, he would pause and remember something Claire had once said. "We don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love." They didn't move in together, didn't rush into marriage, didn't curate a flawless life for social media. Instead, they stayed present, on the easy days, and on the evenings when silence said more than words ever could. Claire still startled awake sometimes from old nightmares. Julian still stared out windows too long, coffee gone cold in his hand, thinking of the family he lost. But now they had each other to sit through the silence. And that was enough. One afternoon, Claire handed Julian the first draft of her novel. It told the story of a young woman lost among voices that weren't her own, until she found her way back to the one that was. When Julian closed the final page, he didn't say much. He simply reached out and held her tightly. "This story needs to be out there," he whispered, "just like you." And for the first time, Claire didn't doubt it. They didn't know what the future would hold. There might be more scandals, failures, losses, or just the slow, inevitable changes that life brings. But what they did know was that they would never let themselves disappear again. Maybe one day Claire would become a published author. Maybe Julian would step down from the company and open a small bookshop by the lake. Maybe they'd live in a quiet town where no one knew their names and simply exist, side by side. Or maybe they'd stay in Chicago, go to work, come home, share small moments and ordinary days. Either way, they'd keep writing their story, page by page. No need for grand finales, no need for applause. Just truth and love And as they watched the city lights flicker into the distance, Claire whispered, "Maybe the hardest part wasn't being invisible, and now knowing I never was, that changes everything. It was believing I had to be." Julian pulled her closer. "You never did," he said, "and you never will again."